Thank you, Mr. Rusa, for that. Good morning, everybody. It seems like a very somber day with the rain outside and all that, so I'm hoping none of you fall asleep during my presentation, so bear with me, please. Thank you very much, FTTH Council. Do I still use that name for now? Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here to share some of the experiences that we have gone through this past few years. I noticed the blurb on your event website still refers to the National Fiberization and Connectivity Plan, which was the plan we came up with about 5 years ago, and that sort of gave me a timeline indication of when you guys were in Malaysia. It's been that long, so welcome back. We are happy to see more guests coming in. I would like to also apologize on behalf of my chairman. Unfortunately, due to scheduling problems, we've got a new minister. So, we are all over the place. So you've got me instead. Too bad. Okay, but never mind. What I would like to do today is actually go through some of the initiatives that we have undertaken this past 5 years. Not so much focusing on fiber per se, but as what Frank mentioned, fiber underlays everything anyway. So there's still a lot of relevance in what we are doing to promote fiber deployment to support other services that the country needs in terms of digital connectivity. Can I get the next, this one, please? I have this temptation to walk about, but can I? Non-digital problems in the world. Yes. Okay. Okay, anyway, so we all have lived through COVID. We know obviously what happened. The challenges that we faced during that time. I still remember the lockdown very, very vividly. It was almost a year, almost exactly to the anniversary date in March. And we all were stuck at home. And suddenly we realized, I cannot Zoom because I don't have fiber. I don't have fixed at home. And in fact, we had, interestingly enough, quite a bit of a spike for subscription for fixed broadband during that time, simply because people who previously thought they can live with mobile, felt that there was not enough anymore. And that was something that was necessary at that point in time. So what we saw that during the COVID, in a way, there was a silver lining to show us that whatever that we were doing in terms of network planning, infrastructure deployment isn't really going to work. And we needed to accelerate some of our plans. We had many complaints as the regulator on quality of service, availability of service, because we had school students, and I'm sure you would have, for you Malaysians who have been following the news, in 2020, 2021, we had a lot of complaints, people climbing up trees to try and get connectivity, especially in the rural areas, so on and so forth. So things were very different. Things changed drastically, especially in terms of consumer habits in relation to trying to access broadband services. We realized also at that point in time the usual pattern where you have in the middle of city areas, commercial areas, high usage of broadband was no longer true. And that can be also said to be the same today, because a lot of us, companies, do allow our employees to work from home. So that is a reality even till today, which again required some some mindset change, especially in terms of planning for connectivity. We also realized that because a lot of people were accessing the networks at that point in time, that network configuration was not able to cope. There was internet speed being affected, quality being affected. We also had obviously a lot of complaints. In fact, MCMC, the telcos were defined or categorized as necessary services, so we could go to work, do whatever that we needed to do to make sure that we address the issues that happened during COVID. So what was good about COVID, as bizarre as it sounds, was the fact that we needed to do more. We needed to do things differently. We needed to then address all those issues in anticipation for similar events that may happen in future. We couldn't just say, okay, this is just something that's happening now. We'll turn around, we'll turn the corner. It won't, be with us perpetually. But I see some of my colleagues here wearing masks. I also like to wear masks. So things, are not going to change that drastically. We still need to be mindful that these kind of things can happen. So we needed to have a different way of planning infrastructure deployment. So we wanted to make sure that we have a country that's globally competitive, robust, resilient, and also have a digital-based society to remain competitive. And all this relates specifically to things like how do we provide education, the tools that you need to access education, how do we make sure businesses remain resilient, how do we also ensure that in all this, we still need to connect with each other from a community perspective as a society. So COVID taught us a lot. If we didn't realize it before, during COVID, we realized that much, yeah? Okay, all right. So what did MCMC do? In 2020, June, we set up a lab structure, which took almost 4 weeks. We said that, okay, we don't want a top-bottom approach. We got our telcos together, stuck them in a room at our office. We also got all the relevant ministries, stakeholders that were involved in infrastructure planning, deployment, policies, and things like that, and said, okay, let's sit down together, look at the gaps that we face in terms of connectivity, whether it's fiber, whether it's mobile, anything. Let's come up with a plan. And industry, you tell us what you can commit to. Because if the regulator tells the licensees, you do this, you do that, then later if anything goes wrong, they say, oh, MCMC told us to do this. We didn't suggest this. We didn't come up with this proposal. So we said, okay, we don't want to do that anymore. We don't have the luxury of time to have a plan and then you go and think about it and come back and tell us whether you can do it or not. We said, never mind, let's sit down together in this enclosed room. We fight it out, we throw chairs, we throw files, doesn't matter. But let's come up with something that is doable and let's come up with something fast because the country cannot afford to wait. So this happened in 2020. And why it was important also to bring other stakeholders like other ministries and all that. We have a problem in that state governments, we have the federal government. Each state in Malaysia has also their own requirements imposed by the local authorities, imposed by the state government. Now, when we talk about infrastructure deployment, we need things like right of way. We need to make sure that permits are issued by the local authorities. The state governments need to support by having facilitative policies. That has always been a problem. So we said, okay, come, join us. Make this plan something that we can implement by being facilitative. If we plan, we don't tell them beforehand, then everybody will say, this is not my plan. There's no ownership. So we tried to gather as many stakeholders as possible so that all these stakeholders were also involved in the planning process. So in August 2020, the Jendela plan was formulated. It's basically a Malay word, Jalinan Digital Negara, which basically is the country's digital network plan. So we looked at different aspects of infrastructure and we set targets. And again, these targets were not set. There's a Malay term for it. It's called shock sendiri. MCMC did not just, in a fit of being very proud of ourselves, come up with a plan. All these targets that were set were done collectively. So the service providers had input, the other stakeholders that had direct relations to whatever that was going to be planned also gave input, and we came up with all these targets, which seemed at that point in time, even I thought it was quite ambitious, but of course the chairman of the day said, no, if we don't aim high, we will never get something. So we said, okay, we'll divide it into phases, phase 1, phase 2. We had fiber connectivity. We said by 2022, we should have the amount stipulated on the slide. We also said that mobile broadband speeds also need to be improved. We are constantly being compared to other countries, Vietnam, forget about Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand and all that, which seems to be always ahead of us. Then we also looked at how do we want to improve 4G coverage. So this was to address particularly places in rural Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak, and some of these places are really rural. You don't even have proper roads and things like that. But communities there need to be served. Communities there need to have access simply because if you can't go to school, if you need to work in a way from home and you want to go back to your village, how are you going to do that if you don't have adequate connectivity? So that is why we say, okay, we need to really set targets in terms of expanding our coverage. We needed to also optimize the use of spectrum so that 4G services can be better. And that is why we said that we need to also sunset 3G. And we also need to look into how we can manage connectivity through satellite in some of these rural areas, because you just cannot put up towers, it's too expensive. There are literally no roads, you have to take boats. I'm not sure whether colleagues from overseas have ever been to some of these hinterlands in Sarawak. I grew up in a very small town in Sabah. If there's rain, there's landslide, that's it, we are stuck inside, you can't come out. So in these kind of places, it will be difficult to, forget about fiber, you can't even put up towers, so you would need satellite. So we needed to identify those areas and set targets as well for those areas. And in the beginning, we said maybe 5G we don't talk about yet because we've got basic problems that we needed to correct. So let's talk about 4G. Let's talk about how far we can bring fiber. 5G, let's wait a while. So that was the initial thinking. But along the way, in 2021, 2022, the government also realized, hey, if we don't start talking about 5G now, if we don't start about deploying 5G immediately, guess what? Our neighbors regionally will overtake us because 5G is important, especially if you want to serve enterprise customers, if you want to, again, improve speeds and things like that, have businesses also go digital, 5G is important. So we did a bit of tweaking to the plan and say that instead of waiting for 5G to be deployed only, say, in 2023, let's look at bringing it forward to phase 1, which means something has to be seen 2022 or 2021. So that was the thinking. And what we finally wanted to achieve and what we are all working very hard on now is that by 2025, we want to achieve 9 million premises passed for 5G. We want to make sure that we can achieve 100 Mbps speeds for mobile. And this is something that still gives me a bit of palpitations today, 100% internet coverage in populated areas. So tall orders, but I suppose this is our version of moonshot. If you don't aim high, then you'll always be settling for something lower. Okay, there was a request by the council to actually talk about policy interventions and how you can actually get policy interventions sorted out to help with whatever that we were planning to do. So with Jendela, what happened was sometimes Malaysia is very good at coming up with highfalutin plans that look very good on paper, but we seem to fall short on the implementation part. I would say that MCMC is also guilty. I can see some people nodding. So that is why sometimes I think citizens and all that, they get very leery or very wary about all these government plans, because it's very nice to see you'll have this little booklet, then you put, I've got a lot of booklets like that in my office as well, then you put it somewhere in the shelf and 10 years later when I'm clearing my room, I say, hey, I remember this. So we didn't want Jendela to go down that unfortunate road. What we did was, we said that, okay, we need to have a proper governance structure. Now, as much as we love committees, believe me, some of these committees are quite effective. For nothing else, it sometimes shames people into then doing things when things get stuck. So we had this continuous project implementation and problem solving working committee. then that would be escalated to this committee, which is called the Jendela Implementation Committee, which is chaired by MCMC. So MCMC gathers all the service providers on a regular basis and say, come, tell us what you have achieved, report to us. Do you have a problem? Okay, you cannot go to this and this state because, you know, the state government there is delaying their permitting and things like that. So our state officers then will go to the state government or the local authority and try to ease the way. So this is how we have been doing problem solving. Then, of course, we have a steering committee above that that is chaired by the minister. Usually, most of the problems are solved at MCMC because nobody wants to trouble the minister with this kind of operational details, but sometimes there are policy interventions that are required. So the minister will then bring it up to, say, his counterpart, cabinets, or even at any other national level committees to resolve some of these policy impediments. And it goes on and so forth. I won't go into detail. But this kind of committees also are formed not only at the federal level, but at the state level as well, because the state really plays a very important role in ensuring that whatever policies that are available at the state level facilitates infrastructure. Trust me when I say that there is a lot of bureaucratic processes, and sometimes local authorities and things like that look at infrastructure deployment also as a means of earning revenue. And when that happens, sometimes the cost or the fees charged may be quite high. And then our licensees will say, oh, okay, you know, it's going to be difficult, it's quite burdensome because we have to pass the cost to someone. And unfortunately, sometimes that someone are consumers. So this is where MCMC helps facilitate through our minister, through our state officers as well, at all these committees at the state level to say, look, if you do this or if you impose this, there will be a problem. But of course, there are some states that are very helpful, very facilitative, because the state government or the local authorities are aware of the importance of having digital connectivity. So that helps us as well. So from a policy perspective, this is where it is very important to get stakeholder buy-in, because MCMC as a regulator alone will not be able to do much in terms of national level policies. We only implement. At most, we can make a lot of noise, whine, and hope that somebody up there hears us. So where are we now in terms of whatever initiative? So the initiatives under Jendela encompasses both commitments made by the service providers through their commercial investments, as well as utilizing the Universal Service Fund, which is a fund that the licensees contribute towards, and MCMC then issues out tenders to say deploy fiber, deploy towers and things like that. Incidentally, just to clarify, USP is not a form of contract. We do not contract out projects. USP, the framework, Universal Service Fund, that contribution that goes into that fund, and monies from that fund is utilized then to deploy project, that is actually a regulatory requirement. So any service provider that undertakes, that is picked to undertake a rollout of infrastructure through the USP fund, has a regulatory obligation to make sure they deliver. So this is one of the things that also helps us in managing this kind of infrastructure, and we will not hopefully have situations where the project, stops midway, or the licensee said, I can't do this anymore, because there will be penalties imposed. So this is a very unique thing about the way in which projects under the USP framework is undertaken. So where we are now, when we started off right on top, the baseline, August 2020, and where we are now, we are well on target. I don't have the Q4 figures as yet because that is being embargoed until we actually issue it out. But if you look at the Q3 of 2022, it's quite a substantial increase. But having said that, we still get a lot of complaints. We still have to face, in fact, we just completed answering quite a number of Parliament questions because Parliament is going to come into session in coming week. I think there are about 40 over questions just on connectivity alone, right? So this is an ongoing issue. Somebody told me it's just not building a road. When you talk about digital connectivity, you build a road, problems won't go away. You need to make sure that the roads are tarred. You must make sure that, okay, sometimes you have little blockages, you have to do detours. So that is how digital connectivity, infrastructure deployment particularly works in terms of managing complaints, in terms of addressing issues. So we are on track, but of course more needs to be done. It is also not a plan that is cast in stone. We have to adjust to the current requirements, future requirements as well. And what is interesting, which is the next part of my presentation, would be how 5G also has required some thinking difference. Next, please. Oh, that's me. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I think most of you in the room may have heard or is at least familiar with the fact that our approach in terms of 5G deployment is a little bit unique. We did not go the usual way of divvying up our spectrum and appointing more than one operator to deploy. It was quite a radical decision. We are still grappling with it now, but nonetheless, at that point in time, the government felt that this was the best way to do it. What was announced in March 2021 is that the deployment of 5G will be done through a special purpose vehicle fully owned by the government. Fully owned by the government, and that particular vehicle will be the sole single network provider for 5G. I remember we got a lot of flack. We got a lot of questions from analysts, from international associations. It's like, why? Why single wholesale network? Why create a monopoly? But as I said, there was thinking that went behind it. Number one, we needed to optimize spectrum. We needed to do this fast because, as mentioned, while we were grappling with 4G connectivity issues, quality issues, and we wanted our existing licensees to focus on that, we didn't want to distract them in saying that, okay, now go and bid for 5G spectrum and, then invest in deployment of 5G infrastructure. We wanted them to focus on fiber deployment, 4G deployment. So what do we do then? We have to obviously appoint someone else who can then really concentrate on 5G deployment. And in this regard, we also needed to make sure that we optimize the scarce resource, which is the spectrum. We have very limited 3.5 and the megahertz and things like that. So we needed to make sure that whatever that was given out will be able to be utilized to achieve the full potential of 5G technology. So that was the thinking behind that. We also wanted to get the service providers to start thinking about service-based competition rather than focus only on infrastructure. Because if everybody and his uncle invest in infrastructure, who is going to then innovate in terms of the service offerings and things like that? So that was the thinking as well. And in March 2022, the government at that point in time affirmed this decision. But having said all this, the current government is also looking at whether or not this is something that we want to proceed with. So there were a number of principles that the 5G single wholesale network party was supposed to focus on or implement. This would be things like ensuring open, fair access. So the argument was because they don't compete at the retail end, they will be presumably transparent and fair. Concept of infra sharing as well. So don't duplicate whatever that's on the ground, use that. Or if you're going to deploy, make sure that that is also accessible by others. This is also another interesting point, joint planning with MNOs. So here DNB will sit down with the MNOs, plan, okay, where MNOs do you want to go? What kind of services do you want to, what kind of companies you want to serve? What kind of consumers you want to serve? So on and so forth. And we also forced parties to sit down and discuss all this so that, again, it won't be a situation where DNB goes and deploys infrastructure where nobody wants to take up. So that was the whole understanding and the principles that were set for DNB. And of course, the advantages, I've mentioned some of it before this, to make sure that we are able to again optimize, reduce the burden of investments and things like that amongst the MNOs. No? Sorry. Or maybe I'm the useless one here, so. Okay, so there was also a lot of questions asked about whether or not we have an adequate regulatory framework put in place because, this is a monopoly, there might be anti-competition and anti-competitive behavior, and what if there is this is a single point of failure, so on and so forth. So MCMC sat down internally, engaged with the appropriate departments and divisions and say, okay, let's come up with a robust regulatory framework as much as we could. So we put in operating license that had lots of special license conditions which were not really imposed on all other operators but only unique to DNB by nature of the function that they have. We also made sure that all these were put into the license condition itself so that we can enforce it if they don't do what they're supposed to do. We also made sure that the use of spectrum will be by the regulations and be enforced very strictly. We also ensured that we have, instruments that were issued to mandate open access and things like that, and also make sure that if there's any industry codes developed in terms of standards, technical codes or whatever, it will be complied with. Next. So the current progress, they launched the network on 15 December 2021. Currently, there are about 5 retail providers that are on their network offering retail services. Some of the operators still want to wait, waiting for the government's decision on the way forward. Coverage as at, I think this is October 2022, 36.1%. They are on track with whatever targets. The ultimate goal is to achieve 80% by 2024. And based on the UCLA measurement, is about 530 Mbps. But to be fair, this is based on very few consumers. I think at that point in time when the measurement was taken, I think it was only YTL that was onboarded. So might be a bit skewed lah. But it's nice to see that anyway up there. So yeah, I think so it's on track. To be fair to DNB, they did deploy in record time, and in fact, a majority of their towers are fiberized. I've just got the figures here. Let me just put on my glasses so I can read out. So out of 3,906 sites, 3,381 have been fiberized. So that is quite a high number, definitely much higher than the 4G sites. So I would say that they're doing quite okay lah. But of course, let's wait and see what the government will say. And I think the minister committed to, by March, for a decision to be made. I think that's it. Next. Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions now, if that's okay, or do I take questions now if there's any questions, because I unfortunately can't stay through this one. I hope also this gives you some flavor of what we have been trying to do. We have been very busy and we will continue to be busy because still a lot more that needs to be done. But I welcome any questions, clarifications that you would like to ask. I may have not touched particular areas that may interest you, so please feel free. If I don't know, I'll say don't. Okay, yes.
Thank you very much for your very complete presentation. I have one question on the target of 2025 of 9 million homes passed for Malaysia. To my knowledge, today there is about 9 million households in Malaysia. So does it mean that it will be full fiber, or you will use maybe fixed wireless access for some rural areas?
Yeah, so it could be, yes, full fiber. But we do also have to take into account challenges, especially reaching to each of the premise. So we may also consider a combination of, say, FWA and things like that. Because I think what COVID also taught us is we have to be pragmatic in our approach. It would be very nice to say fiber everywhere. But unfortunately, even in suburban areas, we have an issue because you might have houses quite dispersed and things like that. And it just doesn't make it cost effective to pull fiber. So we are constantly also on the lookout for new technologies that would enable fiber-like speeds, However, we acknowledge the fact that at the very least that middle mile, if you like, has to be fiber. So, yeah. I might have been startlingly clear, but I doubt that very much. I may have also not mentioned, yes, please.
I may pose a question, maybe not whether it's relevant to MCMC or not. I'm just going to find out, many at times we used to hear about those international gateway data center. Many at times people are saying, why are we not putting a lot of effort in data center compared to our neighbors? Is that a concern to MCMC? No?
Absolutely. I did not mention that, but one of the things under Jendela also, the reiterations of Jendela that we did along the way, is to take into account data centers, as we also see this as something very important for the overall digital connectivity. I think if you had followed the news on My Digital, I believe it was 2021, where there was some announcement made on the investment by some of these hyperscalers coming into Malaysia. I think Amazon, if I'm not mistaken, Microsoft as well. And yes, and all that also would require very good connectivity, including more, say, cable landings and things like that. So definitely there's something that we are looking into. We are also working together with our sister agency, MDAT, because they promote the investments in this, while we make sure that from a connectivity perspective, that is being taken care of. My colleague from TM also will attest to the fact that TM is investing heavily as well in data centers. And yeah, that is definitely something that we are promoting, we are supporting, and we are facilitating.